Yeah, I pre-muted us. Didn't unmute myself. Rookie mistake.
My
Actually,
guy.
this is a tired guy mistake, right?
Mhm.
I've been sitting in front of my computer since about 7:30 this morning. It's 9:13 here. I'm tired, but my mind is sharp for best ball, and that is why we are here, Eric. We are here to draft a best ball team. We're going to do it on what is now my new favorite format, and I forgot to click live on Instagram. So if you're waiting for us on Instagram, there we go. We are now live on
Welcome.
Instagram, folks. Hello for the first time. We're stoked. We're going to get into a marathon best ball draft here on Underdog. If you're not familiar with the format, I just learned about it this week. It's really cool. No playoffs. It's cumulative points over a 17-week total. So, I mean, Eric, looking at this format, you said you're not super familiar with it. Just off of the bat, how do you feel like you're going to draft a little bit differently knowing there's no playoffs? So it's all in 17 straight weeks.
Yeah, not that familiar with it is to put it lightly. We had a nice little pre-show meeting where I was like, "What the hell is this thing? I've never heard of it. Cool, let's get it." So we're doing a bit of a thought exercise in learning about this one live. On its face, I think there are two things that really come to mind. One, a lot of my exposure and my strategy of how I put together a team is very much so driven, if not entirely dictated by not only the stacks that I want to target, but the teams, the correlated teams that they are playing over the course of the 3-week playoff run, right? If you're trying to win, one of these large fields, a Best Ball Mania, even one of the lower buy-in but larger fields like a Puppy or what have you, you not only have to make the playoffs, you have to have these 99th percentile outcomes to win the whole thing, right? So correlating your core stacks is critical in terms of that strategy, and that's kind of mitigated with this approach, right? Yes, it's nice to finish off the year with with a singular week 17 game that goes nuts that you have a lot of exposure to, but I don't think it's going to be as hingent as it is in the typical playoff format. And then secondarily, the second thing that came to mind, I'm I'm kind of a risk taker, especially as my portfolio expands deeper into the season. So guys that are potentially going to miss some time to open the season, a TJ Hawkinson, a who's another one that I'm overexposed to, Keaton Mitchell. These are guys that you can get them late enough and feel okay about covering 4, 5, 6 weeks with the other guys on your roster, and then when they are healthy, they're ready for a playoff run. That type of mentality is going to hurt you in this, right? You need to get that top score every single week. So those are the two things that jump out to me, and I'm sure I'll have a few more light bulbs go off as we get into this draft.
Absolutely. So just real quick, want to jump into the chat here. We've got Optimus, friend and family member Herms, step 1, draft good players,
Herbs.
step 2, question mark, step 3, profit. Step 2 is let your lineup do the work that you did in the draft, I believe. Then we
Yes,
have
the question mark part.
Charlene. Hey guys, thank you, Charlene, for jumping in.
Charlene.
Herb says, I've been drafting a lot of work done. Is that a good idea? I mean, in 2002, that was probably a phenomenal idea, but unfortunately, I don't
I am
know.
firmly in the camp that I believe in Herm's ability to time travel. So that's probably a profitable
It
move
wouldn't
as you
surprise
hop
me.
into the time machine.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't surprise me at all. I'm sure he probably can. So, Eric, we're talking about 17 straight weeks of point scoring. There's no playoffs,
Mhm.
there's no elimination. We talked about the correlation kind of going out the window, right? We don't need to worry about those playoff weeks as much. You're not stabbing or taking a stab at guys like TJ Hawkinson necessarily as early as you might in other formats, but are you still going after those guys later? If they start to fall down boards in this draft, are you looking at it as like, okay, so if I'm in contention in those weeks, I get TJ Hawkinson back. Maybe I've got a guy like Kyle Pitts that I took a little bit higher who's underperformed, but TJ Hawkinson comes back and can save my season. Is he worth maybe an earlier stab, an earlier late round stab, I guess would be the best way to put it.
I wouldn't say so in this format, right? I mentioned that I'm being aggressive in these massive field tournaments, which is to say, like, I'm comfortable taking these injured guys at their ADP or even a little bit before that. I think the part of your question that I want to underscore is more about the way that you pair that position, right? Like if TJ Hawkinson is your tight end 1 or tight end 2, I don't feel very good about that in this marathon format, right? But if you're talking about a world where you have a Pitts and Evan Ingram ahead of them, I think that's a circumstance where it makes a bit more sense. But that also is an entirely different texture to how I've been compiling my roster so far, right? I'm going with more of the anchor tight end approach. So yeah, I mean the fact that this seemingly straightforward wrinkle in the scoring and the format of this game is unlocking an entirely different strategy is why Underdog is such a chef's kiss beautiful platform, right? It's not just burning through as many drafts of the same sort as you can get through. Each one of these has a little bit of a different wrinkle and a different approach to it, and that's what keeps it fun. That's what keeps me firing at these every single day over the summer.
Right. Well, I admittedly have not. This will only be my fifth best ball draft this year on Underdog, which admittedly is very far behind where I would normally be, about 25 to 30 drafts behind where I normally am. You may have seen I'm working on something just a little bit behind the scenes here. But that said, I really am. I'm going to give a little bit of an Underdog plug here, but the things that they've got going on for the NFL season, they've got the Sprint, which is a week 15 to 17 competition that you're drafting ahead of the season. They've got the Eliminator, which is 17 weeks of basically FC Eliminator, if you're familiar with that side of the Scott Fishbowl universe. The Puppy with Superflex. They've got the Marathon going now. They just have so many different contests. It makes it fun to play best ball where this really wasn't something we were doing 4, 5, 6 years ago. You got to love it. It adds such a new layer to it, and it gives us another way to lose money. I mean, who doesn't love that, right?
It's the best part, right?
Right.
For me, I've been fortunate enough to have a successful first campaign, my first time playing on the platform. So walked away from my first season with a little bit of walking around money, and at that point, right, like, until you actually withdraw it, that's not real money, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you reinvest all of those winnings into the next summer's best balls, right? So I mean, look, there's a dollar amount when I log into my account, but realistically, I'm still looking at the same like $40 that I dropped into it 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, no, I know, right? Like I think I put like $50 in like 2021, and I'm still somehow managing to balance that $50.
Spin it up.
I just real quick want to go to the chat. We've got Albert Merriquin. He says, "Sup, Nate and Eric." Albert, you have been tuning in with us for a long time, wherever I have been. So I much appreciate you continuing to ride with us. Eric, before we get into the draft, which we're going to do very soon here. In fact, let's get in there. Let's hit that enter button. What do you think?
Yeah, let's hit it.
Count of 3.
Synchronized watches.
3,
2,
2, 1. There we go. Did you land in my draft, sir?
I don't see you.
Oh, I don't see you either.
No way. It
no
happened.
way.
This is my nightmare.
This is my nightmare too. Well, I guess we're both drafting independently.
All right.
What do you know? Well, I'm still waiting on 11 more people. It's kind of interesting they wouldn't combine.
This is literally what happened. I was the last one in my draft. I was the 12th one in my draft, and it started a new one for you. You know what? For the brand, for the sake of what we're doing here at Optimus, I'm gonna click the almighty autopilot button here and jump into the actual marathon that you're in.
All right,
see if this gets me in here with you.
It should. I would imagine it will. Better hurry, though. We got them filling up here. We got 2 full. As it's filling up here, I'm going to promote our Dynasty show, which selfishly I am hosting tomorrow. Selfishly, I'm promoting it. Not selfishly, I'm hosting it, of course, which I'm very excited for this show, man. I've got John Arrington making his debut as my Dynasty co-host. We should also have my Dynasty Diehards co-host, Matt Chester, coming on here. Yeah, nope, I definitely screwed that part up there. But hey, look, I did it. We got there. We have got this up. I am just waiting for Eric to get in here as soon as you can, man.
I believe that I'm in here. I'm looking at what appears to be the same number of participants. It just doesn't show until everyone is filled, right?
Sure, we're 4 of 12. So while we're waiting for this to fill, we're probably going to have a minute or two. So you have done many more best ball drafts than I have done this year, Eric. Are there any players right now that you're seeing trending that you think I don't want to touch? I want nothing to do with this player.
Ooh, I mean, I guess in theory, no, right? Like, I'm drafting enough teams to where I'm gonna want some exposure to guys, right?
Sure.
I'm finding myself not getting to a lot of the players around the end of the first round, right? Like, I'm not finding myself getting to a ton of Puka Nakua. I'm not finding myself getting to a ton of Jahmyr Gibbs. These are guys that I don't mind kind of jumping a few spots past them and getting guys like a Drake London or a Marvin Harrison that are sitting kind of in the 13 to 15 ADP range overall.
Yep.
Also, looking at my exposures top to bottom, I'm going to tell myself that this is a proxy of where their ADP is. I have surprisingly little Green Bay, and that was not my intention heading into best ball season. I think this is just the way that the board is broken. But yeah, right now Christian Watson is my most exposed Packer at a cool 16%. So need to start prioritizing the Packers as we get deeper into the summer for sure.
Because if you're watching right now and you feel like drafting was with us, head on over to Underdog, check out the marathon. Chances are you're going to get landed in this draft. We have 4 of 12. We need to get 8 more people in this so we can get going here. So Eric, I want to ask you about Marshawn Lloyd because he's somebody we talked about on Club Fantasy last night as we're talking Packer exposure. I feel like he has a chance to be not the featured back in this offense, but I think he has a chance to be at least a 50-50 share here with A.J. Dillon. I got him pretty late last night. I think I got him 12th, 13th round. Do you feel like that's good value for a guy like Marshawn Lloyd right now, given him rookie, but still, he could have a really large role in this offense out of the gate.
Yeah, I like that pick in particular for a few different reasons. One, right, we're looking at one where yes, there's going to be a pseudo committee for the Packers, but I think we can see him pick up not necessarily the role, but the work that was largely going to AJ Dillon fairly quickly, and beyond that, like. I mean, yes, Josh Jacobs signed a pretty handsome deal to become a Packer, but if you take a closer look at that contract, it's a lot of money on paper. They can kind of get out of it after 1 year without really a whole lot of dead cap and burden left there, right? So I think, I take that as a signal that Green Bay might be only, kind of a toe or two in the water on Josh Jacobs. So if we think about Marshawn Lloyd, he has a skill set that is categorically unique from the other two guys that are believed to get a fair amount of touches in that backfield. If he can pick up the offense, if he can pick up pass pro, which is always a question for rookie running backs. I mean, there's a world where week over week, he can edge his way into being on the right side of the split in this backfield pretty quickly. And that'll be the case on an offense that I think is going to be one of the better ones in all of the NFL. I'm very bullish on what Jordan Love and the Packers will be able to do this year. So love getting Lloyd all the way down in the 12th round.
So Josh Jacobs' presence in Green Bay is honestly, and it's so insignificant to me that I didn't even mention him here when I was talking about Lloyd and Dillon. Is that fair? Do you think? I mean, there are 2 situations this season that reek Dalvin Cook going to the Jets last year to me. The first one is Aaron Jones to Green Bay, to Minnesota. And the second one is Josh Jacobs going to Green Bay. I feel a sense that these are players whose teams are saying, we've seen what we needed to see. They're not worth any sort of extension. There's nothing left in the tank, not even a thank you for your service type extension as we see players get every once in a while. Am I far off on that? Because I feel like both of these guys are getting drafted too high. I would prefer Aaron Jones over Josh Jacobs. I think there's maybe a little bit more left in that tank. I like the offensive situation better. But am I off base here, especially on Jacobs?
I don't think you're entirely off base, right? Like the part that I'll circle is where you say that both of these guys are probably getting overdrafted a little bit. I think that is very much so a fair characterization. You talk about, concern for what they have left in the tank. Yes, Josh Jacobs is only 26 years old, but he's 26 years old with one of the heaviest workloads in all of the NFL over the last handful of years, right? So not a whole lot of tread left on those tires. He's kind of a weird fit in their blocking scheme and the way that they run the ball overall. So it was kind of a head scratcher when I saw him go there, especially when you consider that he got more money than any other running back in the free agent market this year, right? A free agent cycle where running backs were getting paid more than they had been in the last few years. So yeah, it feels like it's a bit of a head scratcher. Like I mentioned before, Green Bay can get off the hook after this year without a whole lot of love loss or damage to their cap. So, maybe they were just kind of playing to his ego by giving him a big number that isn't really hard and fast, right? It's more monopoly money than anything else. But yeah, both of these guys where they're being drafted. I mean, actually, I'm looking at it now. I have absolutely 0% exposure to Josh Jacobs across my 35 teams that have completed. I've got a bit more than 0 exposure to Aaron Jones, but he's still in the high single digits. I got him at 8, almost 9% right now. So yeah, I mean, these guys aren't really guys that are priorities for me in a vacuum. Where they're going in drafts, I'm not really finding myself taking a lot of running backs either, right? So, I'm leaving them out on the board for other people to pick up more often than not.
So right now on Underdog, Josh Jacobs is going as the running back 11.
Thank you. No.
That makes me want to throw up a little bit if we're being completely honest. And it's not because I ate something weird. I can't handle that ADP. Now, Aaron Jones is going a full 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slots behind him. So he's going as RB19. That I can stomach. I think Aaron Jones in that offense, plain and simple, I think you can justify him as an RB19 2021, 17, 16, given that this is a passing offense in Minnesota and he's a pass catching back, right? You're not going to ask him to do a ton between the tackles because you don't need him to. You need him to catch the ball. I think Aaron Jones could actually maybe outperform his ADP this year.
Yeah, not crazy to think at all, right? Like we talk about the composition of these running back rooms and where there are duplicative skill sets as opposed to unique skill sets. And Aaron Jones is a pretty unique skill set there in that backfield for Minnesota, and specifically where he's being drafted, right? Like he doesn't have to put up a prolific season by any means to outperform RB19, right? I've currently got him projected at RB16. So I guess I'm more bullish than the market on him, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if he pushes towards, even 12 to 14 range, kind of that fringe RB1 territory. If the volume's there, this offense, plays at a high pace. If everything goes right with JJ McCarthy and this Vikings team is scoring a lot of touchdowns, there are outs. Point being that can get him, well ahead of that ADP. Whereas with Jacobs, there are 8 guys at a quick scroll that I would rather have than Josh Jacobs that are ranked a spot or 2 or 5 behind him.
Right. Well, okay. So I'm pulled up depth charts here. Just out of curiosity, looking at Minnesota's depth chart, Aaron Jones has to compete with Ty Chandler and Myles Gaskin. That's not in an offense. It's not going to run the ball. Yeah. Aaron Jones becomes a slot receiver, right? You got Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. Brandon Powell, N'Keal Harry just moved to tight end now. So, he's behind Hawkinson, or he plays ahead of Hawkinson while he's injured. You go to the Green Bay depth chart, there's a lot more competition for Josh Jacobs. Like, this is kind of like put up or shut up. If he doesn't perform, he's going to find himself with bench time. Jacobs, Dillon, Marshawn Lloyd, those are 3 guys that I think are all capable of, if they're fully healthy and playing 100%, can carry the load. If Jacobs can't do it, you shift to Dillon and Marshawn Lloyd. Plain and simple.
Yeah, and we've got plenty of tape that would indicate that Dillon can't really do it either, right? So the runway is a little bit clearer in front of Marshawn Lloyd. Obviously not not the leader in the clubhouse the way that Aaron Jones is in terms of, who is most likely to get the vast majority of work to open the season, but there are ways that he can get there, and that's exactly the type of player you want to speculate with in the
Right.
early teens rounds, right? Take a flyer on him. By that point, you've already established the guys that you're projecting to be your starters, and if that role emerges for him, if someone gets injured in front of Lloyd,
Right.
now you're talking about a guy that will very likely break your starting lineup week in and week out. That you got in the 12th, sometimes the 13th round. Like that is almost categorically what best ball titles are made of.
Good, no, 100%. And I think that Lloyd, of a lot of the rookie running backs, he has the best path to being productive this season. Jonathan Brooks, of course, we've talked about, like he's in this Carolina offense where it's Chuba Hubbard and it's Jonathan Brooks. Well, Jonathan Brooks is likely going to get as much volume as they can give him once he's healthy. But also, I mean, Eric, it's a bad offense. So how much a bad offense that puts some money into the offensive line, but really how good is that offensive line? Who Jonathan Brooks, Marshawn Lloyd, Braylon Allen, some of these higher round guys, who has a better opportunity than Marshawn Lloyd? And we'll finish after this. We spent way too much time talking about Marshawn Lloyd, but I mean, really, and I said this before the draft, I thought that he might be the best rookie prospect at running back in this draft. Is his position the best of any of these guys that are coming into the league this year, or am I full of shit?
I mean, he was definitely one of my favorite prospects coming in. I have a knack for growing keen on guys like Marshawn Lloyd or Izzy Abanaconda who just fall into horrible situations with a bunch of guys in front of them. In the case of Lloyd in particular, I'm not as worried about the guys that are blocking him from playing time. If you're gonna back me into a corner, I would say I probably feel a bit better about Jonathan Brooks on the entirety of the season. But when we talk about comparing them kind of game by game when they're each getting a representative workload, I think on a per game basis, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Marshawn Lloyd leads the class by the time that he starts getting over 50% of the work, right? I just think that Jonathan Brooks is probably going to get that workload sooner, albeit in a much grosser situation in Carolina.
Oh, fair enough. So now to get away from Marshawn Lloyd, I'm going to take this pause. We've got, guys, 2 more slots in this draft. If you would like to draft with us, head over to Underdog Fantasy, get into the marathon. We just need 2 more people to fill it. I'm looking at you, Coop. I think it's legal in Massachusetts. If it is, don't be a coward. I'll put Pitts in my queue and I'll get to him before you do. But I want to talk about our show, the Optimus NFL show with our host, Brad Bolton, Daniel O'Connell, all the way from down under in Adelaide, Australia. At least I know Brad is in Adelaide. I'm not 100% sure where Daniel is. Guys, check this show out. It is dropping on Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. The podcast audio-only version will drop on Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be across all of your favorite podcast platforms. They're going to be dropping knowledge on the optimal NFL offense. This is not fantasy related whatsoever. So make sure that you check them out this Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, on Kick, on Facebook, on Twitch, on Instagram, on Twitter, and then on your favorite podcast network at 2 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. All right, so we are still 2 people away. I see that Coop did not get in there because it's clearly probably illegal in Massachusetts here. Dynasty Coach A, we got dropping in saying ditto. I don't know what he's talking about. I probably jumped ahead here in the comments. Eric, as we're waiting for these 2 more spots.
He's saying he loves Brooks.
Oh, I get it. Well, here's the thing. Brad loves Carolina, and I understand it. This is a team that if you get it on the bottom end and they grow and they get better and better and better, you can say you were there. Brad, they're going to get there. They will eventually. But here, okay, let's talk Carolina for a minute as we wait for this league to fill here, Eric. Bryce Young, saw him going 10th round in a super flex draft last night. Is that a good value? Is that okay, I got him late. Let's see if he pops off. I'll grab one more in like the 16th round. If he fails, I've got someone a little bit late. Is he worth taking him that late? Is it worth rostering him at all? Do you think there's any hope in this Dave Canellis offense in Carolina with the improvements on the line and the draft picks they made that Bryce Young can maybe break out a little bit this season?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of hope, right? Like in so much as we kind of saw his floor last year, right? Like on the whole, we kind of take for granted just how difficult it is to be effective at the NFL level as a rookie quarterback, right? Like we just assume that these good prospects are immediately going to catch on, and rightfully so. It takes a little while to adjust to the speed of the pro level. Not to mention just the Swiss cheese roster that he was playing around, the, I'll say, below replacement level coaching staff that was working to develop him, right? So now we're talking about at least a scenario where like the arrow's pointing up in a few different ways, right? Like I'm a big fan of Dave Canales. He is one of the rare guys that seems to be able to drop into just about any system, just about any circumstance with quarterback and at least get the most out of him, right? Like doesn't necessarily make him a world beater, right? But understands what he's working with and finds ways to set him up to succeed. I think that is very much so what we can anticipate with Bryce Young. And now Young is in an offense that, bolstered the line. They went out and spent a ton of money on the interior part of that line. So they're keeping pressure out of his face. They went out and brought in some new weapons for him, right? Like if the question is, do I anticipate Bryce Young having a better season than he did last year? Almost definitively, yes. Like one of the closest to a lock that I would put out there, assuming that he stays healthy, he will outperform what he did in his rookie campaign. Now, how high is his upside? That's a valid question. To the root of your question, getting a guy that is favored to be the starting quarterback for all 17 weeks of a season in the 10th round of a superflex draft is phenomenal. I think that is great value. Most of the time, those guys are off by the 8th, 9th round at latest.
Sure.
So yeah, he's one of my favorite kind of sneaky value targets. But I mean, you have to keep in mind what you're getting there, right? Like you can't go in thinking that he's going to all of a sudden bust into, the top 5, top 10 of the position, because that's probably a bridge too far.
Well, and I really like what you just said there, because any player has value depending on their ADP. So if you can get a player at the right value, it's always worth drafting them. It doesn't matter who it is. And yes, the draft is firing up, guys. We are 16 seconds away from being full on drafting. We're just going to go ahead here. I'm going to put, we got Herms in here. We have got a bunch of other people in here. Here we go. We got some badges in here. Last night I had to draft between 2 badges. But poor Gator J was between 3 badges on one side and 2 badges on another. So he was just kind of screwed with his picks. Never fun. Okay, guys, here we go. We have got going. We've got CeeDee Lamb and Christian McCaffrey off the board out of the gate. I've been seeing Christian McCaffrey go pretty immediately in these drafts, Eric. Does that surprise you? And do you think maybe his value is a little bit higher now with that new contract over the last 2 days?
I mean, I don't think the contract really impacts his value from a fantasy or certainly from a best ball standpoint. I'm already on tilt because I was just talking on a show last night about how I have no CeeDee Lamb, which means I'm just not landing in the second pick in many of my drafts. Here I have landed in the second pick of this draft, and CeeDee Lamb goes first overall. So already on tilt, going to be steaming through the rest of this draft.
Sure.
Christian McCaffrey is a fine consolation prize. I think what we can glean from his new contract is that it seems very unlikely that both Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel get the money that they're hoping for with San Francisco, as they are doling it out to a fairly elderly running back, at least by running back standards.
Right. Well, I think in San Francisco, it's either Ayuk or Deebo. And John Lynch isn't an idiot, and Kyle Shanahan's not an idiot. So you give the money to Ayuk, right? You let Deebo go. He ends up somewhere else. Christian McCaffrey, I mean, you gave him that money. They clearly believe he can compete for the next 2 to 3 seasons. And I know that this isn't best ball, but in Dynasty, I mean, are you in on McCaffrey in a startup as a first-round pick still?
I am not, because I am an unapologetic ageist when it comes to Dynasty, right? So like I'm
Same.
not going to have guys of that age at that position on my roster. I mean, maybe if he's falling like, I don't know, 15 spots below ADP, I'll take a look at it. But yeah, generally speaking, especially at that point in the draft, right? Like you really have to decide, all right, I'm going to be the team that tries to shoot the moon year one and competes immediately. And
Right.
I don't like that composition of how those teams come together. So I mean, I'm at a point where I had him, I was moving off of him, as far back as like a year or two ago. So I mean, he's not a priority if we're talking about startups.
And that's a fair point. I'm willing to acquire him on a team that's contending, that needs a running
Yeah.
back this season. Outside of that, though, I'm not reaching on him. I'm not even touching him in a startup draft. All right, let's look at this first round. It's very interesting. We've got CeeDee Lamb off the board first, as we discussed. You took McCaffrey 2, Herms, Amon Ra number 3. Then we've got Tyreek, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson. I took him at 6. Jamar Chase off the board at 7. Big run. It's PPR. Makes sense. It's not super flex. You're going to see these wide receivers come off the board. But then you've got Bijan and Bryce at 8 and 9. Does that surprise you at all?
No, not in terms of the players that went in the first 9, right? Like this is really kind of settled in as this grouping of first half to first 60% of the first round. The order is a little bit surprising. Like I mentioned, I'm not seeing a whole lot of CeeDee Lamb going first, but I think you can absolutely make that argument. Obviously, Herms is making a statement with Amon-Ra St. Brown at 103, but you can't really poke holes in that either.
No.
5th is probably the earliest that I've seen AJ Brown, right? I tend to see him sort of as the last wide receiver before Hall and Bijan, or Bijan and Hall come off the board. But yeah, 1 through 9, this is really the same players that we're seeing, but a slightly different order. I'm sure you were thrilled to see Justin Jefferson at 106, as was Red Hook seeing Jamar Chase at 107.
Yeah, it was it was honestly a toss-up for me, because with Justin Jefferson, there's obviously the rookie quarterback supporting a wide receiver 1 questions. It doesn't happen very often. And you've got Jamar Chase with Joe Burrow coming back, assumingly fully healthy. His hair is freaking gorgeous. So do with that what you will. But for me, Justin Jefferson, I think this is the year where we see a rookie quarterback support a wide receiver 1. And not just any wide receiver 1. I think he's the overall wide receiver 1 in this Minnesota offense, especially with a guy like McCarthy, who's going to throw the ball a lot in an offense that has to look at their running backs like we talked about. Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson, when he's healthy, are the beneficiary of most of that volume on top of Aaron Jones. So getting him at 6 is just like a fever dream almost. Can't believe it. Thanks, guys. Much appreciated.
Yeah, look, if there's going to be a year where a quarterback supports a wide receiver 1, this is the circumstance by which it's going to happen, right? To have, for my money, the best wide receiver in the game, running routes out there for a rookie quarterback in a system that is very aggressive in terms of the frequency at which they pass the ball, the depth at which they pass the ball, the pace of play that they trot out there. Like, if McCarthy is even just competent at an NFL level, I think that we still are very likely to see the Justin Jefferson that we've grown accustomed to.
I can't imagine that we don't. Even if JJ McCarthy is mediocre, if he's a mid quarterback his rookie season, Justin Jefferson still could be wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 in fantasy and PPR, because we've seen that happen before.
We have.
Okay,
you have 17 seconds to make a pick here, so
I do,
give
and
you the
I
courtesy.
know. Yeah, please do. I want to ask you about your Stephon Diggs pick, though, man. I mean, do you really believe in him enough this season in Houston? Do you think there's enough left in the tank to take him that early in the second round?
I do think there's enough left in the tank for sure. I think that Houston does not bring him in if they are not aware of the fact that he's the type of player that expects the ball a fair amount of the time that he's running down in the field. I won't go as far to say that he's getting a quarterback upgrade, but his touchdown equity probably goes up a little bit without having to worry about CJ Stroud running in so many balls for scores when they're in the red zone. But yeah, I mean, the argument for Diggs is really twofold. I think the Texans are going to be yet again one of the better offenses in all of the league. And I don't think that Houston brings him in and secondarily restructures his contract the way that they do if they don't anticipate on utilizing the absolute most that they can out of him. Essentially, it's a 1-year rental, right? And this is a team that very quickly is in a win now window. Like I don't see why they would run the risk of creating a schism in the locker room. I don't see why they would, essentially unnecessarily give him the type of restructure and guaranteed money that they did, giving him the out after one season if they weren't just going to completely pepper him with targets. So yes, he has to compete with Nico Collins and Tank Dell. I don't think we're looking at a crazy target share by any means, but I do think that we're pretty comfortably looking at a wide receiver 1 season for Diggs.
I mean, fair enough. I guess my issue is the dips the last 2 seasons. We've seen him take these just like massive dives for fantasy purposes where it's almost a detriment to have him in your lineup in the playoffs. And I do believe that Houston thinks he's going to produce. I'm afraid that he's not capable of producing at the level they're hoping he can produce. That maybe there's some rose-colored glasses on here from the Houston front office, which I understand that. We've all seen teams do this before, where you bring in this veteran receiver and you're like, he just needs a change of pace. There's still something left in the tank there. I don't know that that's the case with Diggs, but if it is, and you got him in the second round and he does finish as a wide receiver 1, I mean, that's obviously a steal. It's obviously a steal and it's risky, but I'll give you props. This is best ball, right? And that's what best ball is about, taking some risks. If you do everything the way everyone else does it, you're never going to win, right? You're never going to win any money.
Yeah, no doubt. Right. So I think that's part of why Stephon Diggs is falling as far as he is. While this is a game of ceiling of upside, I also think in this format in particular, right? Like let's just say that Stephon Diggs' days of being a top 5, top 8 receiver are done. I think in this system this year, his likelihood of being a top 7 to 14 receiver are pretty solid, right? And in a format where I want 17 weeks of scoring, that moves him up the board a little bit. So being a bit opportunistic in terms of deciding to click the button specifically in the old marathon. I think we got you on mute as you're clicking the button yourself.
Yep, I have got my pick in. Very excited about getting CJ Stroud there.
Oh, he's got a new weapon in town. I think he's pretty good. His name's Stephon Diggs.
I heard him talked about recently. I'm not quite sure where.
Can't figure out where.
I really just love this Houston offense. And I think Diggs, to be fair, is going to play a part of it. I just am concerned that they're going to see at a certain point that they can't give him the volume that he used to garner when he was in his prime. Because we can all agree, right? Stephon Diggs is not in his prime at this point.
I think that's fair to say, right? He's still separating well enough. He's still winning contested catches well enough. The ways in which they were trying to use him through the course of the year last year were kind of weird overall. But yeah, the absolute best days are behind him. But I don't think that we're quite at the point where he's falling off a cliff yet.
No, and that is fair. And I think that there is something to the fact that he's going to have Dalton Schultz, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell to kind of shelter him from coverage. Now let's go back and look at some of these other rounds here. We got stuck on Stephon Diggs, who was 3 rounds ago. Coming off the board in the 3rd round, Devontae Adams, Malik Neighbors, and DJ Metcalf in order. Then we've got Kyren Williams coming off the board here with the 4th pick in the 3rd round. Eric, let's talk about Kyren Williams for a minute, because this is a team, the Los Angeles Rams, that drafted Blake Corum. There are now a lot of people that really believe that is going to hamper Kyren Williams. However, Do you think it actually does, or is this a situation where McVay's going to ride Kyren Williams and Blake Corum is just kind of a nice compliment?
Neither would probably be my answer, right? Look, the Rams, because they've been so aggressive in the trade market, have been operating without a whole lot of early round draft capital for the last handful of years. I think this year was the first time they had a first round pick in like 9 seasons or something absurd like that. So I mentioned that to underscore the fact that they're not an organization to sort of flippantly use their draft capital, right? Like, granted, we're talking about not a day one pick with the acquisition here, but someone that they spent not insignificant draft capital to bring in. The concern with Kyren Williams is so much of his productivity from last year was volume based, right? We're talking about a guy that had 84% snap share, a 79% opportunity share, and this was while he missed like 5 games, right? So like if we're talking about a world where he's even giving up 8, 10, 12 touches over the course of a game, that can really hamper his value. I do appreciate that the market has adjusted to this reality, right? There was a point where Kyren Williams was largely being drafted at the end of the 1-2 turn, and now we're seeing him well into the 3rd round, which I think is more appropriate, but not without its concern.
I mean, I'm okay with him at RB8. That doesn't really bother me. The reason being is that we know what McVay does, right? McVay, he likes a running back, he uses him. I think this is similar in situation to like Todd Gurley, right? You ride Todd Gurley hard. Kyren Williams, he's going to ride him.
Ground, yeah.
Run them all into the ground. This is what the Shanahan system does. You use the guy until you can't use him anymore, and then you're done with him, right? Blake Corum's next man up, but he doesn't have to be next man up this year. He can be next man up next year. He can be that feature, that complementary piece to Kyren Williams that maybe throws defenses off, gives them another year of teams haven't or can't figure out Kyren Williams or this running game, because now you've got it 2-piece. Let's Kyren Williams kind of go off, if you will, and have another second great season. You know who else is going to have a second great season here? John Arrington is hopping on with us, folks.
Let's go.
This is the guy who brought us Devi yesterday. If you have not checked out his show, Devi Devotional, rave reviews from the crew yesterday. Everyone loved it. I've got about 30 shorts to drop from that show. It was such good college football knowledge. And then tomorrow night, we're going to be on the Dynasty show together. So much fun. John, are you in this draft? Did you get in here ahead of time?
I don't believe I'm legally allowed to play Underdog in Florida, so I'm pretty sure I'm not in this draft. But I honestly, like, I was listening. I'm a little drunk, but I was listening and I heard Eric talking about Stephon Diggs as an underrated player, and I was like, man, I got to talk about it. Like, he is so underrated. Like, he has to be the RB or the wide receiver 1 for that team. Like, he has to be. He's too damn good. And like, a lot of times we can look at an Austin Eckler, and I know I'm talking over your draft, so I'm so sorry, but like, we can look at an Austin Eckler or something like that and say, like, this person actually like fell off. Diggs did not fall off. Somebody took over as the offensive coordinator, and then all of a sudden his numbers changed. That's not him falling off. His target share, his Whopper, all that kind of stuff was still elite after that point. He just wasn't completing receptions and that, like, those kind of things at an elite level. That's not necessarily his fault, and so that's why.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. I mean, if you look at his 2023 stats, over his last 5 games, he had 3 games with 5 or less targets. Right? He had 2 games where he only had 2 targets. He caught both. Oddly enough, both for 26 catches. Exactly 5.6 fantasy points in both of those games. I mean, as a fantasy manager, you look at those, you're like, well, this is disappointing. And it's easy if you're not John, as you're stating, like looking at some of the coaching changes and the scheme changes that Buffalo went through. Man, you guys are just changing my mind here, which is the beauty of why we do this stuff. I hear what you guys are saying now about Stephon Diggs. And yes, I latched on to the the 2 straight years of him just falling apart at the back end of the season. But I see what you're saying.
Toronto
Now in a
Dave's
different
telling
system,
you everything you need to know.
I
In Beth We Trust.
know. I know.
In
In Beth We Trust, which John's Beth, we're going to get more into that, guys. And you just wait until we get into that. But you make
normally
a fine
my lighting
point.
and audio is better, but I went to my son's room. My wife's sleeping. I normally record in my own bedroom, and so I went over to my son's room. He's on like a trip or whatever, and so like, I'm going to record in his room. The lighting's terrible, the audio's terrible, the internet's terrible, everything about it's terrible. But I'm here, baby.
But see, this is the dedication that the Optimus team has to hop on. I mean, if you've got something to say and you're watching, we jump on. Right?
Get in there.
Oh man, I'm back on the clock here, guys. Eric, are there any players so far? We are what now? We are 7 rounds into this. I'm already going to tell you I don't like that Ken Walker pick here to start out the 7th round. I'm not a fan of what I perceive he's going to be there in Seattle. I'm going to make my pick. Is there anybody who stands out to you right now, Eric, where it's just like, yeah, no, I don't love this?
I'm going to attack our guy, Zach Morris, with his headband and badge over there. Jordan Addison at the midpoint of the 6th round is someone that I am absolutely not prioritizing, right? I've got some shares here or there in that I've stacked Minnesota plenty, right? But, at cost, he's not someone that I'm a huge fan of, just because so much of his productivity in his rookie season was so heavily touchdown dependent. We stumped at the top of this draft talking about the legitimate question as to whether or not J.J. McCarthy can support a wide receiver 1 in Justin Jefferson. While you can kind of poke holes at the argument that we made, I think what is a much clearer reality is, replicating a 10 touchdown season for a second-year Addison feels like it's a bit of a bridge too far. So he's a player that I'm not finding myself getting at cost. He's a player that I'm happy was off the board when I picked 2 turns later and was able to sneak in JSN as my wide receiver 4. So yeah, Addison, I mean, I would probably set his line at 4.5 touchdowns, maybe 5.5 this year.
In that offense, that makes sense to me. I'm with you on that one. And then here's one I don't like. Xavier Worthy in the 6th round. I love the potential. And I said this last night on the Club Fantasy show when we were talking about kind of a similar thing. But I don't know that this is the year where we see that. We thought Rashee Rice was going to be suspended for the first handful of games. That may not be the case now. He seems to have wiggled himself out of most of the legal trouble.
Yeah.
Right? So he could be a full go. I don't know that Xavier Worthy, this is the year where we see him just blow up. I think that time will come. I think that his skill set fits this offense very well. But we also know that Andy Reid is a very pragmatic coach who's not going to rush a guy into service. They have guys who are serviceable right now. They've got Sky Moore. You may not love it, but they held on to Kadarius Toney. They've got MVS still in that offense. They don't need Xavier Worthy to be the guy. 6th round's too early for me in best ball. John, is there anybody who glares at you here through these first few rounds that you think has just gone off the board way too soon?
Well, I was just going to say, I get your point. A rookie wide receiver, he's already had a hamstring injury with Xavier Worthy. There's question marks about what's going to happen there with that offense and all that kind of stuff. But just looking through the last 2 rounds, and I don't play best ball. So, I'm not trying to be a best ball expert. That's you guys. I'm just looking at actual players and who I believe in. And can you tell me that you actually truly believe that any of the players in the same round and the next round from Xavier Worthy are going to be difference makers as far as the wide receivers? JSN, Jordan Addison, Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy, Roma Dunze, Lab McConkey, Chris Godwin, Keon Coleman, DeAndre Hopkins, Rashee Rice, Christian Watson, Deontay Johnson. They all sound like a bunch of wide receiver 3s to me, So I don't love any of these. And once again, I don't play best ball, so I'm not trying to act like I know more than anyone else. But I'm just saying, this seems like kind of an area of the draft where I would be leaning away from wide receiver, because it seems like people are trying to force wide receivers into this area.
I mean, that's not a terrible point. However, I will say, I think Godwin has good value here in the 6th round. I think there's a good chance that what we saw Baker Mayfield do last season made some of us actually believe in Baker Mayfield. Miracles do happen to you sometimes. Deontay Johnson, again, this is a guy who I think in the right situation, if you can get the ball relatively close to him, he's been knocked on for drops, but I think it's a good situation. I'm okay. I think he could be a wide receiver too. I don't have an issue with him going that early. But getting back to the other players on the board that you were talking about here at wide receiver, I mean, I don't know. I guess you could say that maybe JSN's a reach. I have issues with him. We talked about Jordan Addison, but Brian Thomas, I mean, I think that's a measured risk in Jacksonville. This is an offense we keep waiting to be just like crazy dynamic. They let Calvin Ridley go.
In my opinion, Brian Thomas can't go over Xavier Worthy, regardless of how you feel about Worthy or the situation or whatever. You know, that's just like even going to like rookie drafts, you know, like that kind of thing. Not even talking about best ball. So, but beyond that, I'm sure there's other, picks that we can get into here. I don't want to take over the pod here, but I'm just saying it seems like kind of like almost a dead zone. Maybe you're kind of forced to take a wide receiver there, but it just kind of feels like a dead zone of wide receiver. And I don't know if that gets talked about enough.
John, don't feel bad. I think Eric and I are both so freaking tired at this point that it's like, if you actually want to take this over, I think we're going to go sleep. Let us know when we need to do the outro and we'll be back. No, but for
I
real,
absolutely
John,
will. I'm at least 3 drinks in. I already did a podcast. I had a little podcast juice, and I will absolutely take this over and talk about act like I know what I'm talking about when it comes to best ball. But I would like to leave it to you guys though, the actual experts.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but we do play a lot of best ball, Eric and I. And Eric, I want to ask you about this one. Brock Purdy in the 8th round. He's a very polarizing player when it comes to fantasy. Some say he's Trent Dilfer. Some say he's Joe Flacco, which is slightly better than Trent Dilfer, I suppose. Where did you land on Brock Purdy? And I mean, really 8th round. Are you okay with that valuation on him in best ball?
Yeah, 8th round feels a little rich, right? I think that's probably a dozen or so picks ahead of ADP. I don't mind reaching for your guy a little early, but looking at this team in particular, right? Like, we're not looking at a team that has any San Francisco 49ers on it, right? So you're not reaching for the sake of creating a stack. It feels like it's a little bit out of place. Now, granted, Brock Purdy is coming off of a season where he was quarterback 6, right? So on that merit alone, you can't exactly throw too many stones at him going, near the beginning of the 9th round. But more so than anything, just having to pay that kind of premium when you're not doing so for the sake of stacking just feels a little backwards to me. Gotcha, I'm mute, Nate.
At first glance, I was going to say that Jared Goff should have gone ahead of Brock Purdy. Ends up going to the same manager. So I'm going to say kudos, sir. Very well done. That's a nice, not quarterback stack, but I like the pairing. And as I go in here to make my pick, I think I'm going to go back to the running back well here. Is there any running backs right now that you're seeing go maybe higher than you feel like they should, but feel like a calculated risk?
Tony Pollard seems really high, in my opinion. Like, people want him to be what they thought he was going to be after that breakout season, but then he showed us who he is, regardless of the injury and everything. Everything coming out of Tennessee is that it's going to be basically a 50-50 split with him and Tajay. So I just don't understand why Tony Pollard. This is high, but for running backs, it kind of is still considered high, and I don't really get it. Honestly, Tajay went less than a round later, but I would just rather take that pick than take Pollard, almost a round earlier.
Well, I think it's interesting with Tony Pollard because everybody's so excited. Hey, this is a run-heavy offense. Guys, this isn't necessarily still going to be a run-heavy offense. It's a completely different coaching staff, right? Mike Vrabel's gone. This is not going to be the Tennessee Titans offense we're all used to, and they're showing that. They brought in DeAndre Hopkins. They brought in Tony Pollard, who's more of a pass-catching back, if we're honest. That's where his talent lies. Tajay Spears, again, is one of those guys who's better out of the backfield as a pass catcher than most running backs. And that said, Tyjae Spears is also the guy who's better between the tackles. And I'm with you, John. I don't love Tony Pollard at ADP. I think if he's a guy who slips a little bit farther back, he's maybe slotting in as a back end RB2, maybe a high end RB3. I'm okay with that valuation. Maybe there's a little bit of a steal there. Eric, how do you feel about Tony Pollard? Like, are you Tony Pollard or are you Tyjae Spears? Because I don't think you can be for both. I think you have to pick a camp here.
Yeah, I do think you have to pick a camp. I am firmly in the Tyjae Spears camp. I was gutted when he went at 113. I think that was about a dozen spots ahead of ADP because his ADP was right around where my pick was going to be at 119. So I panicked and picked Nick Chubb, and then inadvertently got autoed to Romeo Dobbs to kick off my 11th round. So things are going good for me over here in the marathon.
That's terrible.
Gonna have to do a bit of scrambling and triage work here on the back end, but that's half the fun. But to the core of your question, Tyjae Spears, and I don't believe that it's particularly close.
Josh Downs going immediately after you got autoed Romeo Dobbs just hurts that much more.
It does. Yeah. Not feeling great right now.
No, I can't imagine, especially when Justin Herbert went the pick before. Like, not that we necessarily love Justin Herbert this year for like redraft purposes and everything, but I'm pretty sure you'd much rather have Justin Herbert on your team right now, even if it was the second QB or whatever, than Romeo Doubs.
Yeah, the auto itself was kind of weird because Doubs wasn't the highest player on the board in terms of ADP. I think he was the highest in terms of projection. But there were like 6 guys ahead of him in terms of ADP, I would have been fine with any of those 6. I literally got the one guy.
No, that's a rough auto, man. I have no idea how they auto it, but it sounds like it goes just by pure projections.
Yeah. Well, he's my wide receiver 6, so I am officially out of the wide receiver business as I try to cobble together a competitive roster for the rest of these rounds. Nate, we got you on mute.
Still muted, Nate. We got to get you better at this, buddy.
I'm working on it here. I'm typing, I'm doing things. Guys, I wanted to tell you, if you're watching us right now on Twitter, we would really, really appreciate it if you would hop over to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Optimus Fantasy Football. That helps us so much. We're trying to get that channel growing. It'll help us monetize and bring you even more amazing content. But thank you so much for tuning in. We are now rolling into the 12th round of this best ball draft. Just started off with, guys, you're not going to believe this. We had a Gabe Davis sighting at the beginning of the 12th round. He goes with pick 133. NRAH gets Jahan Dotson and Gabe Davis on the turn. Who would you rather have? Gun to your head, guys. We'll start with you, Eric. Jahan Dotson or Gabe Davis? Who are you taking in a draft?
I'm probably taking Gabe Davis at cost, right? A bit of a murkier situation in terms of the guys that he's competing against. But he has that sort of spike week skill set that you don't mind adding onto your roster as your wide receiver 6 in his case. While I'm bullish on Jaden Daniels as a fantasy asset in year number 1, that doesn't have a whole lot to do with his throwing, right? So, looking for what could theoretically be the 3rd or maybe even 4th option there for the Commanders in Dotson. It feels like too many things have to go right for that to pay off. Whereas, if nothing else, I think that, Gabe Davis can have those spike weeks that we're looking for and break his way into your roster, 3, 4, 5 times this year pretty readily.
I think that's a fair point. Look, I've never been a Gabe Davis fan. I don't care for him. I think he's overrated. I got burned by him in 2020, I believe it was. I think because I was doing a show I recommended him to people on a fantasy intervention, Eric, fantasy intervention waiver wire show. And then he just continued to suck for the rest of the season. And I just felt foolish. So I won't be in on Gabe Davis. Jahan Dotson, on the other hand, I don't know why I like the situation, but I think having Jaden Daniels in there at quarterback and just this new offense, new ownership, new coaching staff, I don't know, man. I'm kind of excited about Jahan Dotson. I'm excited about Terry McLaurin. Excited about all these guys in Washington specifically.
I'll just say it. I kind of agree with Eric. I feel like if you just think about like the rookie quarterback vibe, like regardless of how you feel about Jaden Daniels and everything, you should probably feel better about Gabe Davis at that spot. Now, luckily, the guy drafted both, so it doesn't truly matter for him. But, for our purposes, I feel like I would lean Gabe Davis as much as I like Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson, I feel, is the better player. Gabe Davis is in the better situation, so I feel like I would go ahead and go with him. But I'm more concerned about your draft pick right now because I love Marshawn Lloyd. I don't know about his, his actual like draft position, like where he normally gets drafted or whatever, but I just love the player.
I was generally right about 12th round here on Underdog. It's about where we're seeing him go. Deshaun Watson, guys, how the mighty have fallen over the last 3 to 4 seasons. 13th round.
13th round, only doing it because quarterbacks have been flying off the board much faster than I would like to admit. I don't mind doing it. Because I have anchored with David Njoku, so I've got some work to do on the tight end front, but wanted to get the stack there. But moreover, because I anchored with Patrick Mahomes, right? So I feel pretty good about the ability for Watson to do the need fill during that week 6 bye of Mahomes, in the rare event that he starts to look like shades of his old self. Maybe he breaks the lineup here or there, but buyer beware on Deshaun Watson. I'm only comfortable doing it when you have a prolific quarterback one like I do in Patrick Mahomes. And Calvin over here twisting the knife. I was talking about how I didn't have much Green Bay exposure at the top of the show, and Romeo Dobbs just got plopped in my lap. Maybe that was it. Maybe the underdog gods were like, all right, we'll base this decision off of exposure. Get Eric into the Green Bay market. Appreciate the comment there, Calvin. And speaking of commenters, unless we've tipped over the top here in the last few minutes, I think we're one subscriber away from 100 on YouTube.
Oh man!
If you're out here watching, there's plenty of you guys that are chilling with us live. If you haven't hit the button yet, hit the button. It'd be so sick to hit that triple digit. 6 days after we launch this thing? 5 days after we launch this thing?
That would be amazing. But real quick, I want to touch on. So, Eric, you only have Mahomes and Watson, correct?
That is correct.
I can't scroll up. I'm only looking at the screen, so I don't know. But I just wanted to I feel like I don't play best ball, but I do actually talk to a lot of people about best ball, just helping people with with player values and that kind of thing, and even just strategy. Just I deal with a lot of obviously tier based drafting and stuff like that. And I'm like, it doesn't change just because you're doing best ball. It should still be tier based drafting. But I feel like a lot of people get caught up in the fact. I've seen people posting on Twitter or whatever, they get caught up on the fact of, hey, I have Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. They get really excited. But I feel like your way of doing it, I have Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson is the better way of doing it. And I'm not saying any way is the perfect way or whatever. I'm not trying to act like that. I have no idea. But you have Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, and one of them has 36 points on week 2, and one of them has 34 points in week 2. That doesn't really help you. But you have Lamar, you have Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, and all of a sudden there's a bye week and that kind of thing. That actually helps you. So, I mean, obviously you're discounting players, or you're doing that once you actually make that pick. But you're not going into it going, I'm going to get 2 early round quarterbacks or anything like that, right? Correct?
Generally not, right? Where the exception to that rule lies is specifically if you're talking about guys that get it done with their legs a little bit more than they do with their arms, because those players just have, measurably, if not incrementally, higher likelihood of sustaining an injury as they are running with the ball, right? So,
sure,
in the case of the example you use, Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, no, I wouldn't really ever prioritize that pairing in particular. But if you're talking about a Jalen Hurts and Kyler Murray, or a Jalen Hurts and a Lamar Jackson, Someone that is a bit more dependent on their ability to run the ball and in turn exposing themselves to some more injury. Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels, right? Like these guys that are equally as prolific runners as they are passers. I don't mind being a little bit more aggressive in terms of which backup quarterback I pair them up with.
No, I appreciate it. And you're on the clock, so go ahead and take that pick.
Not for long.
Not for long. Oh, I love the Vidal pick. Kamani
John and I
Vidal
are.
Oh yeah, we were there.
John and I are
Senior
big
Bowl.
Kamani Vidal stands. It's why we're friends. It's where we bonded in Mobile. I really love this.
We were always like, oh, I like this guy. And then we went to sit in the Senior Bowl and we like drank beers at 10 a.m. together and ate glizzies at 10 a.m. Like we had to get in line before they actually opened to make sure that we had beers and glizzies at 10 a.m. And then we're like, no, we're besties now. We're gonna start a company. We're gonna do all this stuff.
We're gonna do all this stuff. What I learned in Mobile is there are two things you cannot keep away from football analysts of any level: scouts, analysts, executives. Yingling and a 10 a.m. glizzy.
That's very true, man. It's very true.
You can't.
I'm not gonna like you can't do it. Like we're waiting in line and they go, "What do you want?" And they're like expecting to say like a breakfast sandwich or something. We're like Yingling and a glizzy.
Yingling and a glizzy.
We can only give you 2 Yinglings. Like I guess we'll be back in 20 minutes.
You make us sound like we were just degenerates the whole time in Mobile. We did study a lot of film.
No,
man.
We did.
That's film study fuel. What are you talking about?
It is.
100%.
So you get gassed up.
Scroll down so we can actually see what's happening here.
Hold on, I got to make my pick. Then I promise I will. Ooh.
No, let's ask him questions so he gets some obscure Green Bay Packer.
That's hilarious.
Tyler Croft.
Don't scroll down that much. We want to see what happened in the last round at least.
Well, if I'd known you're going to be so demanding, John, I would have never let you on the show here.
We're less interested in how many rounds are left and more about what's happened in the draft so far.
I promise you guys as the listener, this will be the last time I'm invited on the Best Ball Show, but it's okay.
I can co-sign on that. No, I'm kidding, John. You're always welcome. Guys, so we got Baker Mayfield and Aaron Rodgers lasting until the 14th round. They're going after none other than Denver Broncos wonderkind running back, Jaleel McLaughlin. Are we going a little too crazy for this kid in Denver, given that they've got Javonte Williams, who's now a year and a half off that brutal knee injury? They drafted Audric Estime. Was McLaughlin more of a flash in the pan, or is this a kid who you guys, either one of you, I will start with you, Eric, think is going to be more involved in this offense?
I don't know if I'd say he'd be more involved in the offense, right? Like I think he carved out a pretty nice little role for himself down the stretch run last year. I don't know where the additional workload comes for him, right? Like if it was just him and Javonte Williams in this backfield, maybe you can see him earning, a slightly bigger share. But I think, kind of like I was saying with the Rams earlier, Sean Payton is not one to be flippant in terms of how he uses his draft capital. So,
right.
They went out and brought the kid in for a specific reason. I think we're going to see him get at least a little bit of work, and that largely works to kind of cap the upside for Jaleel McLaughlin, right? So he's a player that I like much more in the dynasty context. I like much more in the redraft context. I think his ADP is fine for best ball. I just don't really see like where his upside comes from, barring injury, which is the constant for all of this.
Right, of course. But so here's my issue, because he goes at 158. Excuse me. We've got Antonio Gibson at 161, Chuba Hubbard at 164, Kamani Vidal at 167, Tyler Algier, who has shown that he can carve out a role for himself in that Atlanta offense, with Bijan going after as well at 168. I'm more okay with Khalil Herbert going after him. But between Gibson, Hubbard, Vidal, and Algier, John, which of these guys would you take over McLaughlin? Of these 4 guys, would you prefer over McLaughlin?
I mean, obviously we're the Vidal people, like we're the Kamani Vidal people. So like we have to say Vidal, but honestly, like just looking through it, I don't hate him in the order or whatever that he was drafted as far as running backs. But I feel like this is the time to pivot over to a different position. You know, like it wasn't necessarily, even though I don't hate him as like the running back pick there, that doesn't mean that you should have taken a running back there. And so like you still could have gotten a Marvin Mims from the same team that has a lot more upside. You know, even if you don't necessarily love Marvin Mims, don't necessarily love Bo Nix or even the offense, you have to admit it's an ambiguous situation. You're drafting him in the 15th round, and you might actually have the wide receiver 1 on this team when it's all said and done. Like, I would much rather take the upside there. A Javon Baker from New England. New England has a terrible schedule. Obviously there's a lot up in the air with everything, but like there's a lot of people that love Baker and everything. So
I love Javon Baker.
Yeah, I feel like there's other
fan.
positions that you could possibly maneuver to not take a McLaughlin. Like you took even Ben
Sure.
Sinnott. Like I don't love Ben
Yeah.
Sinnott, but like I don't hate it as far as like a transitioning over to the tight end position, like that kind of thing. I don't love it in like a redraft form just because I don't necessarily think he's going to be amazing this year. But I would probably
I don't know,
take a
dude.
Ben
I mean,
Sinnott over Jaleel McLaughlin.
Yeah. Okay, Eric. The Drake May Bryce Young stack, 16th, 17th round, or pairing, again, not a stack, the pairing. How would you feel heading into a season with those two dudes on your best ball roster? I mean, it's later, right? So you got them 15th, 16th round. You've got Justin Herbert already. Is that a worthwhile risk, taking those guys on the turn there?
Yeah, I mean, based on how this team has come together, I would think so, right? Like, for my money, I would rather have Daniel Jones, the player that I selected right after him, more than at least Drake May, right? We talked about it a bit with Bryce Young earlier. Like, with Young, you're looking at a guy that's going to have the job for the entirety of the season, assuming he's healthy, right? And so that as your QB3 in a one quarterback format is perfectly fine. Drake May, that's a legitimate question, right? Like we could be looking at 4, 6, maybe 10 games where Jacoby Brissett is starting in New England. So for that to be, your QB2 or QB3 is a little bit dicey, right? It's risky, right? But on the flip side of that, because of that risk that he assumed, he has Justin Herbert as his QB1, who he got in the 11th round and was able to stack up a pretty filthy roster. CeeDee Lamb, Deebo Samuels, Devontae Adams, Christian Kirk opening as his wide receiver core. Then goes a little bit heavy at the tight ends part. Mark Andrews and George Kittle, Kenneth Walker, Jalen Warren, DeAndre Swift, right? Like he loaded this roster up by waiting at the QB position. So I don't mind it at all. I guess the thing that I would look to do is maybe move away from May and towards a player that we believe will have the job for the totality of the season.
I probably would
looking
have
for someone who.
No, I'm here. I mean, I prefer Will Levis over Drake May, but he went ahead of him. I probably would have taken Bo Nix over Drake May.
I absolutely would have. Yeah,
John, I'm sure that's hard for you to hear because you know how much I shit talked Bo Nix when we were in Mobile, just watching his footwork. Did not care for it. But like, Denver's a good situation.
I feel like you're looking for more upside in best ball. Bo Nix is never going to give you upside. He's a garbage.
He might though.
He's a backup quarterback and like trying to be a starter, just like a Desmond Ridder or something like that. Like you might get your random 1 or 2 weeks, and that's fine. Like Eric took Daniel Jones here in the 17th round. I really don't mind.
I don't hate that.
Like no one thinks that Daniel Jones is going to all of a sudden be good. But we know for a fact that Daniel Jones can get like 22 points or something like that on like the random weeks because he has like 60 yards rushing or whatever it might be.
Right.
And so like I don't hate that kind of stuff. Bo Nix, he has a little bit of rushing aspect to his game. I don't know how much that's going to translate to the NFL because he's not necessarily like an actual rusher. but he's not a good thrower of the ball. So like he's a backup QB. Like I don't know. Like he might have like the random game that matters, but
Sure.
I honestly, as much as I hate Will Levis, like I would almost say like Will Levis matters more in this format because like he's gonna be terrible over the course of a season, but he's gonna have that random game like he had last year where he has 4 touchdowns and whatever else. I'll take.
Are we sure he's going to be terrible, John? Like,
he's absolutely.
Guys, are we positive 100%. That Will Levis is going to be terrible?
We watched 4 straight years of college and then a year of the NFL, and we know he's going to be terrible.
We said the same thing about Josh Allen, dude. That's all.
No. Josh Allen. No one ever watched Josh Allen.
And I'm not saying that he is Josh Allen. Well, I lived like, I don't know, an hour and a half south where he played, so I watched him, but
no one ever watched him, and they were like, oh, wow, where'd this guy come from?
Honestly, I was pissed the Broncos didn't take a stab at him in that draft. I wanted to see him in Denver. He reminded me so much of what John Elway was. But alas, we ended up with Russell Wilson instead. And here we are. He's not cooking anymore in Denver. He's cooking in Pittsburgh. And hopefully he's just making Primanti sandwiches because I've heard delicious. Never had one. We're rounding out this draft, guys. We are complete. Wonderful. Awesome. We got a marathon knocked out, Eric. We did it. John, thanks for hopping on with us, guys. We're going to post this draft on Twitter. We're going to ask for some reactions. We're going to post some polls here on the YouTube channel. We would love your interaction on that. I want to thank everyone who has tuned in live. I want to thank everyone who will tune in later. And Eric, I think there's something you want to tell everybody, some breaking news here about our channel that I'm very excited for you to tell everyone.
Yeah, if you cannot decode emoji from our guy Hoove here, we are officially at 100 subscribers.
Yes.
This is an incredible accomplishment that we couldn't do without everyone here at the Optimus team, without everyone that has been watching along, right? As a reminder, we kicked this joint off with a 7, 12, 19-hour marathon that Nate is still recovering from on Saturday. So to be at 100 is incredible. And part of the face that I was making there, Nate, is, as you were mentioning, posting this draft board on Twitter. I'm just waiting for my mentions to explode with how this team came together, because I had to take a bit of a different route. But you know what, my build is unique to the other 40 or so that I fired off, so that's not a total loss.
No, man.
Do you think that there's a reason why you strayed from the norm? I mean, just to give the listener something to understand.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that went a little bit different here. I am usually one to wait on running back a good bit after, as weird as it is to say, CeeDee Lamb was sniped while I was sitting in the 2 pick. Getting Christian McCaffrey, by default made this build fairly different relative to how the rest of the builds are coming together. And on the whole, maybe because of the marathon format, felt like quarterbacks were going off the board a little bit faster than I'm accustomed to, I should say, in Best Ball Mania and some of the other large field and non-marathon formats. So it left me kind of scrambling for some of the stacks that I've grown accustomed to being able to reach at various points in the draft that were just unattainable at this point, right? By and large, I'm looking at 1-by-1 stacks for 2 of my quarterbacks, a naked Daniel Jones. That's just not a build that I've put together in BBM or the Puppy or any of the other large field options out there.
That's what makes all this so. Oh, go ahead, go, John.
I'm taking over here, baby, because I don't do best ball. I don't do best ball very often. So like whenever it gets to talk to people about it, I always want to ask questions because. All right, so you didn't necessarily get to do like the stacks that you normally like and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So like you had to do something different. So at that point, are you relying on the best players available? Because I feel like it should be the obvious answer, but but yet it doesn't always seem to be the obvious answer. It seems like most people are like, no, the stacks. The stacks are what's important. I need to get that fifth wide receiver for the Dolphins, more than a good player for a different team or whatever. And I'm like, no. Why don't we just get like actual good players here? Which you kind of did. Like I'm saying that's why. I mean, is that what you want to convey to people?
Yeah, in part, right? Like you can definitely go a bit too far with overstacking, right? For the larger the field that your tournament is, the more aggressive you can be with the number of players that you stack up. To walk away with with essentially 1-by-1 stacks is definitely the thinnest that I've had out there. To the core of your question, I'm willing to reach a bit for the stake of completing a stack, but not an absurd amount, right? Like I'll take a guy 5, 7, maybe 8 to 10 picks ahead of ADP if I know that it locks up a stack that I'm prioritizing. But by and large, especially in this marathon format where it is just 17 weeks cumulative scoring, you have to slide the scale closer to the best player available type of approach.
All right, guys. I'm tired. Eric's tired. John is
It's
tired.
hot back here.
I'm sure you're all, I know your AC isn't even working. I'm sitting in a cold basement, so at least I've got that. But we're going to get you guys out of here. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight for the debut of the Optimus Best Ball Playbook here on the Optimus Fantasy Football Network on YouTube, on Kick. We are on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. We're everywhere, guys. Make sure that you find us on your favorite platform. This will be a podcast tomorrow morning. You can find us on Spotify, on Amazon Music. We're on iHeartRadio. We're on CastBox. We're all over the place. Again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.